Hey, sports fans, welcome to another edition of the Carolina Weather Group. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte. The NFL season is back, and this week we're going to look back in our Carolina Weather Group archive to help you get ready to set those fantasy football rosters. In 2020, we talked to the fantasy football weather guys about what you need to know in order to consider real weather during your otherwise fantasy football. Things like wind and temperature and pressure. We're going to hear their conversation in just a moment. But before we get started, a special thanks to our Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/Carolina Weather Group. You help keep the lights on around me, and we want to thank you for your financial support of our show. Just this past week, we were able to renew our website, carolinaweathergroup.com, and pay that bill, thanks to our Patreon supporters. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So if you haven't already, please consider signing up. Rates start at just $1. It's over at patreon.com/Carolina Weather Group. And as a special thanks, we give you bonus content and exclusive access to early episodes, like 2 additional episodes that will be coming out later this month. You can check those out early at patreon.com/Carolina Weather Group. All right, now let's cue it over to Scotty and a look back at our 2020 episode with the Fantasy Football Weather Guys.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. We're happy to have you this evening. Welcome to another episode, and tonight's going to be a fun episode. I'm going to go ahead and apologize. I hope I don't talk too much because we're combining weather and sports, and when we do that, it really makes me happy. Tonight we have on with us Sean Bratton and Mike Ventrisi from the Fantasy Football Weather Guys, and if you play fantasy football, you may have never thought about the weather element to it. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the product and how you can follow along throughout the year so your fantasy football team is up to par and potentially beating the rest of your people who are not thinking about the weather. So we're happy to have Sean and Mike on with us tonight.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and share your website. Let's take a look at what you guys have created here. And I mean, this is pretty impressive because it looks like you guys have developed your own modeling within for the continental United States, or what we call CONUS. And so you have U.S. winds and precip primarily for these, with the key, of course. And it looks pretty simple to understand for the average person, right? I mean, for lay terms, this will show a forecast. If we take like west wind, if we have games out west, I assume there's a little bit of a learning curve here, but who came up with this idea and how does it help enhance your the experience for fantasy football if folks want to get plugged into the weather to maybe determine their outcomes?
Yeah, so when we were thinking about these to try to bring up some kind of weather maps here, the first thing we thought about is how do we identify where the stadiums are for people to see what type of weather impacts they could actually be. So essentially, wherever you see those circles with the X in the middle, that's essentially the location of a stadium that actually is predicted is in the upcoming week of games. So you can see here that the Titans there must have a game coming up here. So those stadiums will actually change each week depending on where the home game is. So if you see a little circle with a dot in the middle, that's actually a game where a home game that usually has like a cover on it, so a dome or some kind of retractable roof, so weather won't be an impact there. But the way that we wanted to really get these maps to be helpful is when there are high weather impacted events, those circles will change. You can see often when an area of heavy precipitation or some stronger winds moves in, you'll see that circle turn to an orange or even a red. So like the orange would represent there's a possibility of some impactful conditions from weather if there's a football game taking place during that hour forecast lead you're looking at. If it turns red, it means there's a high chance for some impacts.
If I were to pick east wind and go forward,
you can just go forward.
We would see, there's orange right there. So we're showing the folks out there, if you just hit forward on these buttons, you'll see these impacts in time. And, I'm trying to see how far out these go. Do these go out?
Yeah, they'll go all the way to Sunday. I think recently, the most recent model run, 18Z on Sunday. We got right there. We got one in Miami. I think they're supposed to get some precipitation and maybe some wind. So I think it was on 0Z Monday or 18Z Sunday. for this upcoming week. I think that's the only caution that we have for upcoming weeks. It's going to be a relatively quiet week this week, but
oh, yeah, there it is right there. So it popped up, looks like Tuesday evening. So it looks like that timeline got pushed back a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty neat how you've integrated weather into a forecast impact for a specific area, and it could be anything. It could be anything going on for that area too. So
Sure.
football games in particular, but that's pretty neat. I really like that format. Now, tell us a little bit about the fantasy impact table.
Yeah, sure. So this is a table that will outline each set of games for the week. And to be honest, there's been so many changes with the schedule here because of all the impacts from COVID. But so we try to make sure this is up to date. And I think I did update this on Tuesday. So essentially, it'll show out the slate of games here, and it'll be in chronological order. There are a time and weather impact there. And you can see for the weather, if it says fair, this is the predicted weather for the time of the game, then the impact will show none, right? If you have good conditions, there won't be any real impacts from weather. But if you do see certain criteria met in the wind or precipitation, that's where essentially you can see things like a caution, where essentially winds might be, and precipitation might be like this marginal type of event where there's probably going to be some weather, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a stunter or a significant impact on all the players in the game. But if you do see like some criteria, let's say you have winds 20 miles per hour with heavy rain for the duration of the game, that's where you would see an extreme impact. And this table would update that this updates probably twice a day. So this is a way to kind of come back to the site and look at it.
And this kind of gives us a bird's eye view as to what to expect. So what we do is we use this as kind of a template, and then we'll expand on this during our podcast, and we'll let people know what players we're interested in, because we do have historical stats for specific players and also by position in general. And we can elaborate on, okay, we have forecast at 18, 25 mile an hour winds, whatever it may be. Well, this player in windy conditions, this is how they perform statistically. So we kind of update them on the expectations based on the weather. We are in the process of updating this. Hopefully over the next several weeks. Again, our buddy Nick Schiraldi is going to actually customize this by position and also possibly by players. So the ultimate thing is people want to know, how is my fantasy team going to be impacted? That's bottom line, right? So we're going to have fantasy point differentials based on those weather conditions that we're going to be adding to this table hopefully soon here.
And Sean, you were talking a little bit earlier, you guys actually are doing a lot of the analytics and numbers, and you're talking about specific players who may see the effects. You're talking about Roethlisberger throwing 4 INTs in a snowstorm, or it could be Denver. It's an extremely windy day, so Drew Lock, the wind may affect his performance. So how do you guys talk to us a little bit about that? How you're breaking down how it's affecting individual players?
Yeah, I can lead on this one. So we have basically archived data that we're able to use that breaks it down basically almost every play for every game going back to 2009. So what we're able to do is look at those fantasy stats. So we have fantasy point projections for half-point PPR, full-point PPR, standard leagues, and we're able to look at how that player has performed statistically during those weather-like events. So, hey, how has this quarterback performed in 20 to 30 mile an hour winds? Okay, well, we see a decrease in fantasy points by 4, and they throw their TD or their touchdown interception ratio has changed X, Y, and Z amount. And then we also kind of have another stats package that we'll use based on weather conditions as well. So what we try to do is say, all right, our forecast is this for the weather. Let's look at the specific players and, the positional players that we're interested in for that game and see if there's actually going to be an impact. Because quite frankly, for some players like an Aaron Rodgers, maybe we don't see as much of an impact for them, so we're not going to be as concerned about that player. For other players like a Jared Goff or something like that, or Kirk Cousins, for example, who played in Seattle this week during rainy games, there's an impact there we've seen statistically. So we really got to kind of decipher. We just, we kind of do this by position, but even a little bit more specifically by player when appropriate.
That's really awesome. You guys have been doing this. Obviously, you started the website last year when we're recording this, it's October 14th. So we're about week 5, I think, into the season, maybe week 6. I can't remember with COVID and all that stuff going on. But talk about how the fans, how have you guys, the outreach? I mean, have you got a lot of positive responses from fantasy football player or fantasy footballers? How's that went?
So I think our biggest interaction with folks right now is on our Twitter handle at FFWeatherGuys, where it typically the interaction is most prevalent during weeks where there is predicted weather and the folks are aware of those impacts. Usually when you see like some of the mainstream media or sports channels talking about weather impacts, and usually I guess that as you get up into later in the season, as we know, winter storms or late fall storms can get more energy from the jet streams. That's where we typically see those larger weather impacts. And I think that's where the draws start to come in, especially when people are fighting for those playoff positions, right? They want to make sure that they don't make a mistake, and people start to get really meticulous with their lineups. And we're speaking more specifically on like these redraft leagues, essentially where you have like a draft at the beginning of the season and you have your team throughout the year. So that's where we've seen the most interaction with regards to our fan base.
Yeah, and during those weeks, I mean, we'll broadcast on our Twitter feed like, hey guys, this is what we're forecasting. Here's other impacts, and people will reach out to us. So like, hey, I'm deciding between playing this player and that player. What do you think? And we'll say, hey, based on what we've seen in these weather conditions, this player has a discrepancy of this. We would side with this guy. And so we've seen this for a variety of weather events. Most people think of the big rain or snowstorms, but this also applies for high impact wind events as well. We had 1 week last year that we had 4 big wind events, whereas 25, 35 mile an hour winds, we saw considerable impacts.
Yeah. One of those games was the Kansas City Chiefs, and people who were starting Tyreek Hill and Patrick Mahomes, they were really intent on getting some of those deep bombs that just never happened. They didn't get any passes over 20 yards.
Yeah.
So you literally see these coaches' plans. They change their game plans essentially based off of some of these weather conditions.
Yeah, when it's bad enough. And even more recently, like Mike and I used this information. We were expecting rain for the Washington game and for the Washington football team. And so we actually steered away from Terry McLaurin, and he only had 3 catches for 26 yards, I believe, on Sunday. So which I mean, it wasn't wet for the entire game, but enough where it played an impact. So, yeah.
You mentioned mainstream media. You don't have to drop any names, but have you found maybe a few of those folks sliding into the DM saying, hey, what's the weather going to be like? Everybody's always asking for fantasy football advice. Who should I start? Who should I sit? Have you ever had any messages from folks maybe on the TV that's asked for your opinion?
So I don't think we've had any essentially any folks reach out for start-sit decisions regarding that, but we have some interaction with some of the folks from Fantasy Pros and the Fantasy Footballers, and I think there was a couple of folks from Yahoo. It's Yahoo that are all involved in the industry that will kind of interact time to time with us on Twitter. I think last year. One of the guys from the Fantasy Footballers, Jason Moore.
Jason Moore, yep.
Yeah, he reached out, and it was literally a question about weather, and he's just like, is there any weather experts out there that would understand to know what the actual forecast is here? Because it was during that time of year where it was really high impactful for the people watching for this particular game, and he did reach out to just put a general question. A lot of our fans CC'd him or tweeted at him with our handle, so we can kind of go in there and provide some information.
Hey guys, we touched on this a little bit with talking about individual position players and the impacts on them. I was wondering a little bit about the kicking and punting game. I mean, that seems to be an area of the game that could really be influenced by wind in particular, but also precipitation as well. What sense do you guys make of how important weather is on that aspect of the football game?
Yeah, that absolutely is. And a lot of this comes down, another message that we speak to is it really matters based on the stadium as well, how the winds are swirling around that stadium, how they're funneled in, and also the field type as well. Is this an AstroTurf? Is this a grass field? So those are all things that play in to, how well a kicker can perform in weather conditions. We're in the works right now of gathering kicker data. So I don't want to, say anything quantitatively as far as like from a statistical analysis standpoint, but observationally, we usually talk about games after we see them after the week, and we'll talk about kickers. And we definitely notice that higher winds going cross field or going against the kicker definitely have an impact for sure.
So
Mike,
guys, on any given Sunday,
ahead.
We can have a very diverse slate of weather across the U.S. Are there any particular locations across, anywhere that you guys forecast for that you find particularly challenging or frequently come up as a caution flag?
The most challenging weather for us is convection. It's a really anything in the Florida area, typically in the southeastern United States. This is something that we struggle with early season, late summer into early fall when convection's still blooming. And the high res models will pick up on this stuff. And, we're out 72 hours out. We're like, all right, it's looking like it's going to happen. And we literally have to update people like hourly on Sunday to be like, all right, guys, this is the recent model run. This is what we're expecting. Because, those are mesoscale features that are incredibly hard to predict for a 3 to 4 hour window of time during a ball game. But at the same time, those could be incredibly impactful because you got heavy rains and a lot of wind typically associated with those as well. So I would say those are the ones that we struggle with the most when there's any type of convection.
Yeah, those are the events that typically trip our algorithms in our fancy impact table and some of our maps. If you look at those circles and when we change different colors, you'll see certain model runs show the impacts, and then all because the models were having a hard time resolving the convective features, and sometimes they can sneak under the radar. I remember there was a game last year in Jacksonville where we had this strong northeasterly flow off the ocean that was just bringing these shallow convective cells across the stadium. And it was just like the popcorn variety, and it was just causing, you would hear we didn't talk about it much in the podcast that week because we were the models didn't see it, and then all of a sudden they'd be raining on and off during the game, and Sean was sending us messages. Do you see this rain? It's going. It's the announcers are talking about it. We missed this. I'm like, oh my god, fun. The joys of forecasting Florida weather.
I can only imagine your models. Is it like a blended run? Is it like a high resolution, like her 3 kilometer going into the NAM 3 and 12, then to the GFS out to the 7-day? Do you layer it in that manner? That way you get the higher resolution or the RAP in the first couple of days. So
this is something that we're still working on, and right now, as we were kind of spinning up things here, we've been relying mainly on GFS data at first, but we are shifting over to leverage the national weather blend of models from the National Weather Service. So we are going to be shifting over to that because obviously those are the guys that are paying attention more to each location as and try to be as skillful as possible. And then we can take that information and convert it into the impact or how that impacts the specific players. So it takes some of the burden off of us in the forecasting world and allows us to focus on that impact piece.
And then we can also elaborate on that. Because we may use that from the National Weather Service, but obviously we have access to the different high resolution models. And again, that's something that we typically expand on during our podcast. And there may be some games that don't even come up as a caution on our table necessarily because they may not meet a certain threshold. But for us, just observationally, we know these are things that we need to monitor. So we'll mention them during our podcast or on Twitter.
You're talking about Southeast convection. I would also imagine maybe lake effect snow, Buffalo, Chicago, Cleveland, Green Bay, all locations that could see that, where one side of town could get 6 feet and the other side could get like 2 inches,
Getting back to your social media outreach and your fans, the football fans in general, and how you integrate, how you kind of mesh with everything. How do your fans respond to your products, right? Because it looks like you do everything kind of for free. You're sort of providing that kind of service. And do you find that a lot of fans are really into what you do and share it out, and you get a lot of good response and positive feedback out of it? Or how does all that work? How do you get your how do you know how you're doing overall?
Yeah, no, we always appreciate the feedback. We'll have some people that'll reach out like, oh, I really wish I knew this, or I really wish you approached it this way or offered this kind of information. And again, that's kind of how we're working in developing our webpage and our user interface. So most people have been really constructive and just really helpful and really nice, which is not always the case in the weather world, as we know. Mm-hmm. but yeah, no, it's been a really good experience. We used to even do a photo contest where people would, obviously not the case now, at least for most stadiums, but if you were at a game where there was weather, take a picture for us and, we'll put it on our website or show it during our podcast. And people seem to appreciate that as well.
Yeah, on our website, we do have something called a mailbag where some folks can come in and write us a question, and we can essentially take that feedback and discuss it and respond back. So that's something that's also an option on the website.
Yeah, I think it's this right here. So you can
go.
put your message in and submit. And then there was also what you talked about with this weekly weather blog, then the photo contest. So looks like, you give folks an incentive to sort of be more of a part of the website, which I think is great because you're allowing them to interact with you in your domain, which is awesome. So
well, talking about the product, we'll start to wrap up here. How can we find you? What's the social media platform of choice? I don't know if you guys do Facebook. I know you do Twitter, but tell us about social media. I know you guys do podcasts, blogs. I even think you might be dabbling into doing some live game updates. Am I correct with that?
Yes. Yeah. So we've been moving onto the Twitch platform. So if you twitch.tv/FFWeatherGuys, that's essentially, we have our show usually on Thursday or Fridays. We try to do it around 8 p.m. And then when there are high impact weather events on a Sunday, we'll get up on Twitch again and have a Sunday show usually around 11 a.m. That's one source where we've been kind of more interactive with folks.
Well, guys, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching the Carolina Weather Group. Make sure if you're a fantasy football player, go check out these guys. Fantasy Football Weather Guys, Google them. You can find the Twitter account, website, all of that good info. And make sure that you tune into the blog and the podcast, as well as the live broadcast there on Twitch on Sunday morning. So until then, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.